This is Austin Hirschberger, and this is my Module 12 case study. Section 1 summarizes the case. This case takes place at St. Regis School, which is a K-8 building with an enrollment of 420 students. Facts of the case. Keith Sample, in this case myself, has been the principal at St. Regis School for 3 years and has strong support from the community and faculty. The school has 2 teachers per grade level, K-8, so 18 total. The school receives state funding. The remainder of their funds come from 2 fundraising efforts that are held each year, a candy gift wrap sale and a PTA spring fling. PTA and the school have agreed to use fundraising money to purchase new computers for the last 3 years. They now have 20 new computers, which is pretty good for a school that size. For the next 2 years, and in this case, they have agreed to purchase new software programs for the computers instead of purchasing computers this year. Mrs. Lynn, the library media specialist and computer lab teacher, purchased suggested software programs that were recommended by each teacher. After using the computer software on a lab schedule, teachers suggested that Mrs. Lynn make copies of the software for use on classroom computers so that they could be utilized more efficiently. Mrs. Lynn copied the software onto flash drives and distributed them to teachers. Mrs. Williams, one of the 3rd grade teachers, was excited by the idea. Another 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Brandon, who is new to the school, knows about copying restrictions and was upset by the situation and refuses to use the copies. She informs Mrs. Lynn what she's doing is illegal, and Mrs. Lynn isn't having it. Mrs. Brandon then reports what happened to Mr. Sample, myself. Mrs. Lynn made a total of 12 copies of software programs, 4 for each grade level, 2 through 4. And Mr. Sample confronts Mrs. Lynn about the copies, and she is proud to have saved the school and PTA money. She doesn't really understand that what she's doing is illegal or doesn't think that it's that big of a deal. He asks her to collect all copies and to stop making them. Mrs. Lynn is resistant and reports that the PTA president, Mrs. Evans, helped make the copies as well. Reporting the legal issues. Obviously, in this case, Mrs. Lynn's actions of duplicating the software programs and redistributing them are a direct violation of the U.S. Copyright Act. This equates to piracy, and Mrs. Lynn could face a lawsuit, fines, and possibly jail terms. This could also be jeopardizing to not only Mrs. Lynn, but to the school, the district, and possibly other teachers who are using the copied material. Ethical issues in this case, Mrs. Lynn's lack of concern for laws that apply to her and everybody else and all educators. She's being very ignorant. In this case, another ethical issue that I'm seeing is Mrs. Lynn's refusal to follow orders from her direct supervisor. Section 3, synthesize what has happened in a single sentence. In an attempt to save the school money on computer software, a teacher has infringed on copyright laws by duplicating software and redistributing it to classroom computers. Known facts in the case is for people, Keith Sample, he's been at the school for 3 years. He has strong community and faculty support. There's Mrs. Lynn, who's the library media specialist and computer lab teacher. There's Mrs. Williams. We know she's a 3rd grade teacher who's using the copied material. And Mrs. Brandon, another 3rd grade teacher. This is her first year at St. Regis. She spent 3 years at another school where she is very familiar with the copyright laws. And then there's Mrs. Evans in this case, who was the PTA president and helped Mrs. Lynn make the copies. Program, known facts. It's a public school. It receives state allocation. The budget, basic materials for teachers are purchased through the budget and through the fundraising money. They purchase computers and software programs with the extra funds. Technology, they have 20 new computers in the lab. Software aligns with instructional objectives as it states in the case. And then the fundraising efforts, the candy and gift wrap sales, and then the PTA spring fling. The place, we know it's St. Regis School, K-8 public school, 420 students, 2 sections per grade level. It's a rural community, 25 miles from a large city, and like I said, 2 sections per grade level. Unknown facts in the case. For Mr. Sample, was he aware of copyright laws prior to this incident? The superintendent has kind of a big stake in the case. Are they aware of the situation yet? There's Mrs. Lynn. How many copies did she make, and how does she plan to distribute more? Other teachers, are there any other teachers that are aware of copyright restrictions? Which teachers asked Mrs. Lynn to make copies, and are they using the duplicated software yet? Unknown facts for the program. As far as the software programs, what do they say about copyright protection on each software, and who holds the copyright, who's the manufacturer? And then other software, are there other free educational software options available that could be better utilized? And then the place, unknowns. St. Regis School, could a rolling computer lab be utilized to bring software to each classroom instead of having the schedule where the teachers come to the computer lab? Section 5, review and prioritize the information. This situation could absolutely be damaging to stakeholders. The district, school, and teachers could be at risk of lawsuits, fines, and possibly jail time if it's not resolved. Mrs. Lynn, other teachers in the building, Mr. Sample, the PTA, and the district as a whole have a whole lot of stake in the outcome of this decision. One important stakeholder that is left to be consulted is the superintendent. As the leader of the district, they would need to present a policy to the Board of Education for approval. I will also need to consult with the rest of the faculty in my plan. One thing that I think I can learn more on is to read the copyright statement on the software programs. Permission to duplicate is highly unlikely, but asking the owner is an option in this case. In order to ensure that a similar situation never happens again, an acceptable use policy needs to be implemented and copyright laws need to be communicated to faculty and staff. An effective solution to this case would promote adult success by training staff on copyrights and their application to school through professional development. I've evaluated the situation in terms of legal, ethical, and equity issues. Based on the information that I have, I feel I have enough to make a decision. Identifying my options and possible consequences. Option number 1, the first option would be to do nothing, which means allowing pirated software to continue and to be widely used in the school. Option 2, which is the most liberal option I have, is to fire Mrs. Lynn and all the teachers that had the idea to make copies of the software in the first place and terminate all duplicated software. Option 3, ask the publisher's permission to make copies of the software to be used on a broader scale. Again, this is highly unlikely for them to approve, but that's an option. Option number 4, terminate all flash drives with duplicated software and restrict future copies. In this option, I would tell Mrs. Lynn that either she agreed to stop the pirating or be removed from her position. I would also discuss the situation with the superintendent and ask for a district-wide acceptable use policy to be implemented. Copyright laws and policies will be part of the professional development training for staff. Staff members will be required to sign that they understand and agree to abide by the law. And then option 5 is to explore other educational software options that may be available for free. Pros and cons of these options. Option 1, looking the other way. The pros, the software could be used more widely throughout the classroom like it was originally intended to do and possibly save the school money. The con of this is obvious. The district and certain staff members would be at risk of severe copyright penalties and lawsuits and fines and whatever else. Option 2, put the hammer down. This puts an end to this would be firing all the teachers that had the idea as well as Mrs. Lynn. This puts an end to the use of pirated material and decreases the risk of lawsuits for the school district. The con of this option, this does not communicate copyright laws to stakeholders. Also, equity could be communicated in a better way. Option 3 of seeking the publisher's permission to use copyrighted materials on flash drives. The pros of this, with authorization, this would potentially save the school money and is a legal way to use the software. The con of this option, authorization from the publisher, is highly unlikely. Option number 4, cease, implement, and educate. This stops the illegal activity. It implements a policy that prevents similar situations in the future, communicates laws and rights to stakeholders, and stakeholders have ownership of their actions. It also restores trust in the school community. The con of this option, if Mrs. Lynn refuses to cease distribution of the pirated software, I would have to terminate her contract. Option 5, the last option, exploring free educational software options. This would save the school money and software could be used on all computers and classrooms in the school. The cons of this option, options may be limited and software programs may not be quite as extensive because they're free. Section 8, choosing the best option. After evaluating the options I have identified for this case, I feel the best solution to this conflict is a combination of options 4 and 5. In order to implement the solution, I will need to discuss an acceptable use policy with the superintendent of the district. I also need to pay careful attention to my conversation with Mrs. Lynn, as her employment is a sensitive issue. I'm appreciative of her desire to apply learning objectives in a more efficient manner, but the legal restrictions need to be understood and followed at all times. So she wants to save the school money, but she still needs to follow the law. Copyright laws apply to schools the same as they do individuals. This impacts the ability to distribute educational software to students. For this reason, free educational software will be explored and considered. Communicating copyright laws and policies to all staff through professional development will improve the professional capacity of teachers and is primary objective of this solution. I feel that I have weighed all available options and that this solution will improve our school culture and community by applying a policy that is fair, lawful, and consistent to all stakeholders. Implementing the solution. The first step to this solution is to call together a staff meeting. In this meeting, I will ask all teachers who are utilizing the duplicated material in their classrooms to return their flash drives to me immediately following the meeting. I will also explain to the whole staff without pointing fingers. We don't want to draw attention to Mrs. Lynn or the teachers whose original ideas it were, but explaining copyright laws and the severity of infringing on those laws. The next step in the process is to meet with Mrs. Lynn. This conversation needs to be clearly communicative of the seriousness of copyright laws and restrictions. It is a serious offense to duplicate copyrighted material without the publisher's authorization. I will warn Mrs. Lynn that if she does not discontinue the copying of the software, her contract will be terminated as a protection for the school and the district. I expect that she will accept the ultimatum of discontinuing. If she does, that is good news for our school, as I trust that she is an excellent and efficient teacher, and that she just kind of got caught up in a misinformed decision. And then if she refuses to accept, for whatever reason, her contract will be terminated, and I will immediately begin the search process for her replacement. Option 3 of implementing the solution is meeting with the superintendent. I will explain the situation and ask that a district-wide acceptable use policy be presented to the Board of Education, and if approved, implemented immediately. They should have already had one of these in the first place, but in this case we know that they don't. The policy should address copyright and licensing guidelines for students and staff. The next step is to communicate the district policy, the new one that was implemented by the board, to parents and staff members through a weekly newsletter. The verbiage of the copyright guidelines will be highlighted on the newsletter. The next step, add these guidelines to the parent, student, and staff handbooks and go over them with each party so that they're understood. Professional development is the next step. This training will focus on the U.S. Copyright Act and the law's application to schools and educators. Examples of what is allowed and not allowed in classrooms and schools will be provided to help teachers better understand their rights and restrictions. Teachers will be required to sign that they agree to abide by and adhere to the laws following the training. This is the primary focus of this solution, along with implementing an acceptable use policy. We want to make sure that our teachers understand and are trained on how to follow the copyright laws and what applies to them. The final step in this process and in the solution is to explore free educational software options. I think that there's a lot of free educational software options out there, and that might be a good solution because since they're free, they can be used on as many computers as we want, and it would also save the school and PTA money. All right, thank you for watching.